consulting business, DMC permaculture, and where well, I've been working with Justin for the last, I guess this is our 6th season, and I've helped to design and install the community gardens around the city that Grow Nashua maintains and operates. I've helped with the maintenance and the education piece. So here to continue that this evening. All right, so as I mentioned, tonight's going to be talking about integrated pest management and then moving on to good bugs and bad bugs. So integrated pest management, it's a bit of a mouthful. It's often condensed to IPM in conversations, but as I said, it's kind of a systematic approach to maintaining your garden and keeping it pest-free. It offers multiple strategies, and there's kind of a progression of steps that you take. So we'll get to that in a minute, but you know, what is a pest? Well, a pest is an insect. It's a disease, either a bacterial or a fungal disease, or it could be a weed. And I have weed in parentheses because a weed is really in the eye of the beholder. I prefer to call them volunteers. They're just plants who are taking an opportunity to grow. And I like to identify whatever plant or volunteer is growing in the garden before pulling it. Typically the thing that I pull right away is grass. If I see grass, I get that out of there because that's not really a very useful plant in the garden. So using integrated pest management, we seek to eliminate the cause of the pest, right? We don't want to just kind of treat the symptom. We want to understand the pest, why it's there, and what we can do to get rid of it and prevent it from returning, or at least keep it in check. Right, so a garden is really a whole ecosystem. There are a lot of living creatures, microorganisms in the soil, you know, and it's all part of like a growth decay cycle in nature, right? Things grow, they die, and then they break down. And there's all of these organisms that help to break down plant material that falls in the garden. And a lot of the diseases that we see in our plants, especially fungal and bacteria diseases, are fungus and bacteria that live in the soil that are just trying to do their natural job of breaking down plant material, but they happen to be attacking the plant that's still alive. And so we want to try to keep those in check. So IPM kind of includes good cultural practices, and we'll break that down a little bit more on what that means, but it basically means getting into habits in your garden, maintaining clean garden space, and you know, basically your behaviors and actions in a garden are your cultural practices, and you have them whether you design them or not. So this is kind of intentional cultural practices to ensure a successful garden. Regular monitoring is important in a garden. Ideally, you should be in your garden every day, see what's going on. And if not, I know with some of our gardens, they're not close to home and people work and have lots of things to do, but you should be getting to a garden, 3 times a week, 3, 4, or 5 times a week, and kind of keep an eye on it and knowing what's going on from a day-to-day perspective. So proper identification of a pest is very important, right? You want to know what it is that you're dealing with so you can have a targeted strategy to address that pest. So the lines of defense that we go through in integrated pest management, as I said, cultural practices are kind of the first one, have good habits in the garden. But then we use mechanical strategies to prevent pests from finding their plants. We use biological agents or organisms to help keep our ecosystem in check. And as a final last resort, we're going to use chemical agents. And we'll talk about all of these in more detail moving forward. So first, let's talk a little bit about the cultural practices. So, the first and foremost is maintaining a clean garden, right? So that means, picking up fallen plant matter if it's diseased or has pests on it. It means timely harvesting so that, fruits and vegetables don't fall off of the vine and start to decay and rot, because that presents an opportunity for a pest to take hold and multiply. So we want to make sure that we're harvesting our crops. We want to make sure that we're properly feeding and watering our plants, right? A strong plant is a healthy plant. right? Just like us, when we're run down, we're tired, we're not eating right, we're stressed, that's when illness strikes us, and it's the same for plants. If plants are strong and healthy, and their immune systems are strong, then they can often fight off diseases and tolerate pests. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to that. Properly maintaining tools, and what I mean by that is cleaning your tools. So if you're out there cleaning up from a disease and you're snipping off a lot of diseased plants, and then you go to prune some other plants, the spores or bacteria may be on the blade of your snippers, and when you go to cut something off another plant, you may have inadvertently spread a disease. So cleaning your tools, especially if you're dealing with diseased plant material. Some suggest that you should clean your tool after every cut, so you don't spread it even on the same plant. I think in a typical garden with annuals, I don't know if that's necessary, but certainly true if you're pruning grapes or fruit trees or things, and you have diseases that, either through like an alcohol wipe or a little container of, little bleach solution or something to wipe down the blade in between cuts. So testing your soil and amendments. This is kind of a yearly thing. Typically, the best time to test your soil is in the fall after a growing season to see what has been depleted from your garden. The next best time to plant is to test is in the spring. But the reason the fall is best is because you can start to amend it in the fall, and whatever organic matter or amendments you add to the garden in the fall will start to break down and be more readily available for plants in the spring. So as I mentioned, soil is a living ecosystem in itself. It contains all sorts of bacteria and fungi and nematodes, arthropods and protozoa, and all of these different little microorganisms. And we want to make sure that that is a balanced ecosystem, because if it's out of balance, that's when diseases and pests can take advantage of that opportunity. And one of the other cultural practices is, if you know that you are susceptible to a particular disease, like in the past you've had a particular disease, a blight or something, then you might want to select resistant varieties of a plant when you're doing your planting in the spring. So something to keep in mind as you plan next year's garden, which varieties to plant. So constant monitoring, as I mentioned, is very important. You don't want to, just go away and come back, once a week or, a couple times a month or something like that, because your garden is going to get a little bit out of control. So you want to have your regular visits, ideally once a day. I know that's not possible in many cases. So, 3-4 times a week, get out there and observe your garden, interact with it, check on the plants, look under leaves, see what's going on, find new growth, looking for signs of yellowing in a plant that might mean it's time to feed, or any kind of signs of disease. So here we've got a few pests on the screen here, but what you want to do when you're observing and interacting, if something is wrong with the plant, you want to properly identify that pest. Okay, and there's 3 categories of pests, if you will. There's environmental pest or an environmental issue. So if you see a number of plants of different species all being affected, then that's most likely an environmental situation. So one example, like if you didn't water your garden often enough, then all of your plants are going to be suffering, and so that's an environmental situation. So you need to look at the whole garden. But if it's one species or a couple of plants of a particular species, then it's going to be something that's specific to that crop, and it's going to be the pathogen, which means a disease. Diseases can come in flavors just like with humans, bacterial, excuse me, fungal, or viral. So you want to identify that. And the other type of pest would be an insect. And there are some general pests who will affect multiple plants, but a lot of insects have a favorite variety or plants that they are looking for, and so they're going to be specific to that plant. So in here, we've got a couple of examples. The top picture is powdery mildew, or perhaps a bacterial, excuse me, a fungal disease on the squash plant. Down below, we have a brassica, either a kale or a collard green, or something that has been affected by some sort of insect, probably a cabbage looper. And the pictures on the lower left, we have the moth, is the moth that lays the eggs that turn into the cabbage looper, which is that green caterpillar. So you want to identify your pest. If it's an insect, you want to understand the life cycle of the insect, because you want to look for an opportunity to interrupt that life cycle. So in most cases, like in the cabbage looper, the moth lands on a leaf of a brassica, either a broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, and it lays its eggs. And when those eggs hatch into these caterpillars, the caterpillars eat the leaf. So one way to interrupt that is possibly prevent the moth from landing on the cabbage in the first place. But we'll talk more about that as we get into the next step. So I want to step back here a little bit and just talk about plant needs. This is kind of basic, and it'll only take a couple of minutes here, but we all know that plants are living creatures, living organisms, and they require certain things to survive. So first of all, what do plants do? Plants capture the energy of the sun, and through the process of photosynthesis, using carbon dioxide from the air, using water and nutrients from the soil, this process produces chlorophyll and other phytochemicals, and they produce plant material and grow. So they need to have everything that they need to grow properly. So if we look at the nutrients, and if you notice that the previous slide did not say that plants need soil. Soil is just the medium that helps to provide the nutrients in the water to the plants. It's not what they need. And in organic gardening, we talk about feeding the soil, and then the soil feeds the plant. So in conventional agriculture, where they use synthetic fertilizers, they're actually pumping chemical fertilizers into the soil that are plant ready and ready to be absorbed by the plant immediately. Whereas in organic gardening, we feed the soil breaks down and decomposes all of that material into those nutritional building blocks. So in the synthetic fertilizers, you get a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. Most gardeners are familiar with those three letters. And these are elements that help plants to grow big, green, and produce good fruit. Plants also need, as I mentioned, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These all come from the water and from the air. And then other macronutrients, calcium, sulfur, and magnesium, that help building the structure of the plant, as well as the flowers and fruits. Plants also need a number of micronutrients, as do we humans. So you want to make sure that your soil has these, and there's a longer list, but I just wanted to introduce a small example of these and point out that if we're eating conventionally grown food, a lot of our topsoil has been depleted of these minerals and elements. So the food that we eat may be void in these, because we need these for our health as well. So just another plug for organic gardening. So just because you're going organic doesn't mean you can't fertilize. There are a wide range of fertilizer products out there, and just want to kind of talk a little bit about what you're going to find on the packaging. You're going to find the NPK rating, which talks about how many parts of nitrogen per phosphorus per potassium. General fertilizers, they're all about the same number. And then you're going to find on the back of fertilizers, organic fertilizers, a list of other minerals and elements that are in there. So check the labels and see what's in there, and follow their instructions for the fertilization process. So the question of when to fertilize, and some of these have already gone, because as I mentioned, we're into the growing season. So, but before you're planting your garden, you can mix some into your soil. maybe a week or 10 days after you transplant your seedlings, you can give them a little bit of food. But after that, where we are now, probably every 4 to 6 weeks, you're going to want to feed your plants. And organic fertilizers are usually top dressed. And if we look at the 2 pictures on the bottom, you can see one hand is putting the fertilizer right at the base of the plant, and the other is doing what we call side dressing in between the plants. And what we want to do is we want to do the side dressing. We don't want to put that fertilizer right on top of the plant like that for the danger of it burning the roots of the plant or whatnot. So we want to do this side dressing. So yeah, as I mentioned, probably 4 to 6 weeks from May to August, we want to do our fertilizing, and we don't want to fertilize past August because plants are starting to wind down, days are getting shorter. There's not as much energy from the sun, so they're not absorbing as many nutrients. And all the fertilizing that we've done through the season has probably built up enough nutrients in the soil by that time. And just one little side note, herbs really only need to feed them once at the beginning. They're not as heavy feeders as some of the other vegetables and fruits that we grow in our garden. So just talk a minute about watering, and I did cover this in the last class as well, so it's a little bit of a review, but just it's important to water properly. So I wanted to address this. So we want to monitor the moisture, right? If it's been really rainy, we don't need to water our garden. It is possible to overwater, right? And signs of overwatering could be droopy plants that are yellowing, and that's because their roots are too wet and they're starting to actually rot and they're not able to take up the nutrients that they need. Best time of the day to water is the morning, and that is to give the plants an opportunity to dry out in the sun. You don't want to have wet plants overnight because you're creating an environment that is conducive to fungal diseases. So we want plants to stay dry when they're not being watered. And to that point, it's always best to try to water the soil and not the plant directly. I know some people are like, well, the plant is hot. It's hot during the day, it needs the water, but the way plants work, they get all their water from the roots, they bring it up to their plants. And so as long as there's sufficient water in the soil, you don't need to cool the plants by watering them. And it's important to, when you water deeply, right? We want to encourage deep roots. The more we water, the deeper that water gets. And as soil dries out from top down, we're going to encourage those roots to go down deeper into the soil, and that's what we want. So rather than doing frequent light watering, do infrequent, couple times a week maybe, or once a week, depending on what's going on, and water deeply. I think that plants probably all plants have slightly different water preferences, but about an inch of water a week, I think, is probably all you're going to need for a garden. So that's just kind of a guideline. So I'm going to kind of get into talking a little bit about the systematic approach that is integrated pest management. So we have our cultural practices, we're trying to do those, but we can use mechanical or physical means to protect our plants from pests. And that could be with barriers such as crop covers, like in the top picture on the right. That's a cabbage or a brassica, and they have that cover over it to prevent that moth from landing on the cabbage leaves to lay its eggs to hatch into the caterpillars to eat that. So we understand the life cycle of that cabbage looper, and we're trying to interrupt it by preventing that mama moth from laying her eggs on our crops. So that's one way to do it. Mulch is another great way to keep pests out. And remember, weeds are a pest, or volunteer plants are a pest. So a nice heavy layer of mulch, either chopped leaves or straw, can be very good to suppress those weeds, but they will also retain moisture and protect that soil and the biology in the soil and keep that healthy. So mulch is very important for that reason. Also, a lot of bacterial and fungal diseases are present in a soil, and they aren't really a problem until they reach the plant matter, plant material. So by having a thick layer of mulch in your garden, a new layer every year, you're preventing that bacteria or fungal spore from splashing up onto the plant when it rains. So that's that's how mulching can really help reduce instances of disease. So the other physical method is hand picking or removal, and that is exactly what it sounds like. If you see a pest and identify a pest, like in this picture on the lower left, that is a cucumber beetle or a bean beetle. And you've got a jar, I'm not sure what's in that, but sometimes soapy water is a good thing to put in there, and you just go around and you start knocking those pests right off. In the instances on the right, these are two plants that are under attack, one by probably a fungal disease. So what I would do, that big leaf in the front there that is heavily damaged, I would snip that one off, and then I would probably apply a organic fungicide to that plant. And I have some recipes, and we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to the chemical section. So that will help to reduce the spread of that disease. So the plant on the lower right, even though those leaves are heavily eaten by insects, they are still edible, even though they're not attractive. So you can harvest them, wash them really well to get rid of the bugs in their castings, and you can eat them. But at the very least, you should probably remove any of the leaves that are infected with that. If you see any eggs in the bottom of leaves, certainly get rid of those and or the leaf. So that's kind of the physical, mechanical approaches to IPM. So then we get into the biological approaches. And so, biology is not just bacteria or, plant oils like neem oil or whatnot, but they are predators, any biological partner. So in our garden, we want to do what we can to attract predators. And how we can do that is by planting flowers and in and around our garden that attract those beneficial insects. And we want to create both fodder, which is food, and habitat for these creatures to come and live in our garden, be part of that ecosystem, and help to keep it balanced. So if we look down in the lower left-hand side, there's two pictures. One is a green tomato hornworm, and it has a whole bunch of little white pouches in its back. And so if you see this green green hornworm, tomato hornworm, in your garden, you want to leave that, because those are actually the larva stage of a parasitic wasp. So this wasp actually lays its eggs inside the hornworm. They grow and they hatch on the body of that and produce wasp larvae, which first of all will kill this particular hornworm, but also those will attack and kill other hornworms. So it's using a natural predator, attracting them to your garden. The picture to the right of that is called a mealybug destroyer. And it's like a mealybug, which is actually a bad bug, but it's slightly different. This eats aphids and other small soft-bodied insects. So this is something that we want to, again, invite into our garden. So you can use aromatic confusers. And so what that means is plant aromatic herbs or flowers in your garden that confuse a pest who is looking for the favorite plant. Right, insects are going to be flying around, crawling around, mostly flying around, the pests are, and they're going to try to find their favorite food, like the cabbage looper. If you have all of your cabbage in a row and there's nothing planted in between, then that cabbage moth is just going to land on one cabbage plant after another, lay eggs, and you're going to have an infestation. But if you camouflage your your brassicas, your kales with aromatic herbs and flowers, then it's much more difficult for that pest to find its target plant. So that's kind of why we want to do that. We're essentially camouflaging it visually and aromatically. Some of these plants have dual purpose and they suppress plants, like marigolds secrete a hormone that repels aphids and nematodes that attack tomatoes. So not only do they attract beneficial insects, they repel bad bugs. So that's a wonderful thing. Then, if all else fails, we're having an infestation. Again, I'm going to use cabbage looper as an example. You have your kale and it's infested. You might want to get something called BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis. And it is a bacteria that you spread on. It comes, I think, in powder or spray form, and you spray it on your leaves, and caterpillars eat the leaves, and then they ingest that bacteria and it kills them. Now, this is all well and good, except that BT kills not just the bad caterpillars, but it kills all caterpillars, good and bad. So that's why we want to use a targeted application. So if it's on our kale, we want to make sure we apply that agent only to the plant that is infected to kill that bad bug. So always want to be careful with that. Spinosad is also a bacterial agent that can kill some bugs. And you can research these online, find out what they're useful for and proper usage. Instructions will be on the labels, and highly recommended you follow those instructions. And keep in mind precise targeting of the pest you want to kill. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a little more about attracting predators, just to give a couple of examples of some things to plant. Everybody has probably heard about ladybugs. They're probably the most famous good bug in a garden. And if we want to attract those to our garden, some of the things we can plant are coriander, which is cilantro gone to the flower and seed, dill or fennel, yarrow or calendula. So these will draw the ladybugs. I believe they feed on these plants, but I don't think that they lay their eggs on them, because most of the times I've found ladybug eggs, they are on small trees around the garden, but not actually on these herbs, more on broadleaf tree leaves. Lacewings is another beneficial insect that's a predator of aphids and other small soft-bodied insects, and some flowers that you can plant to attract those are bachelor buttons, marigolds, and alyssum. So flowers like alyssum and yarrow are also beneficial to attract a predatory wasp, the one that lays its eggs in the tomato hornworm. So any multifloral, small white flower will attract that wasp. So anything like that, alyssum, yarrow. Okay, so the final step in the integrated pest management is the chemical one, and this is where we use as a last resort, right? So again, you want to be precisely targeting. You want to properly identify that pest, make sure you know what it is that you want to kill. You want to research, find the proper chemical, and apply it sparingly and precisely. Now, there are organic substitutes, and I have a couple of recipes coming up in the presentation, a fungicide and a pesticide that make good organic substitutes. Now, one thing I want to point out, and this is, I believe to be true, learned in the Master Gardener training, the Cooperative Extension Master Gardener training, is that in community gardens in New Hampshire, it is illegal to apply chemical pesticides. So in all of our Grow Nashua gardens, chemical pesticides are not allowed. So only use the organic substitutes. The reason that is to protect other members of your community from what they call pesticide drift, which is when you're applying pesticides, they often float in the air and land on others. And in a community setting, you can be endangering others if you're applying your chemicals to your garden right next to somebody else's. So I believe that's the rationale behind that law. So here's a recipe for an organic pesticide. This uses garlic, onion, hot pepper, liquid soap, and water. And essentially you chop up all the vegetables. You steep them in warm to hot water for about an hour. And then you strain that, put it into a spray bottle with, my recipe here says a tablespoon of dish soap, but I think that's too much, probably a teaspoon or less of dish soap. And then you apply that to your plants. Now, why does this work? The garlic and the onion are members of the allium family, and they give off an odor. I mean, everybody knows garlic and onions have that strong scent. Well, bugs don't like that. So it repels aphids and other insects. I don't think I have ever seen a pest on a garlic, onion, chive plant. I've just never seen one. So that helps them. They just will land on a plant, they'll smell that, and they'll take off. The hot pepper contains capsaicin, and that is actually a neurotoxin to insects. So that will actually kill them. The reason we put in a little liquid dish soap, and this should be biodegradable dish soap, is that because it helps the spray to adhere to the leaves, to stick to the leaves. Otherwise, the water would probably just run right off. But as you spray it on, it helps that to stay on the leaf. And this needs to be reapplied after rain because it will wash right off. So here's an organic fungicide that I use. I use baking soda, water, and again, a little dish soap, biodegradable with no phosphates. And essentially what I do, as mentioned, like with this poor squash plant here, I would cut off that really big damaged leaf and any others that have visible physical damage, not just the white powdery substance on it. But I would cut that off and throw that in the trash. I would not compost it because that could spread the disease, but I would put that in the landfill, and then spray down the plant with that fungicide, and that should effectively, hopefully, stop the spread of that disease. So one other organic spray I want to talk about, and I won't get into this too much, but compost tea. So this can be applied as a foliar spray, so spraying on the leaves of plants. And what this does when you brew compost tea is you're creating a lot of aerobic bacteria. And just like we have bacteria on our skin that helps us to protect us from disease if we get nicks or cuts, helps to fight off things. Plants have that layer of biology on them as well. So by applying this compost tea with good, healthy aerobic bacteria, we are strengthening the immune system of the plants. So quickly, how to do this on a home scale: a 5-gallon bucket. You take some compost if you have a home composting system, finished compost. Make a little tea bag out of an old t-shirt. Add some molasses, some seaweed, excuse me, to the water, and then put a small pump like a fish tank pump in it and let it aerate for 24 hours. And the air is important because that's where you get the aerobic, the oxygen liking bacteria to grow. And so with the kelp and the molasses, the seaweed, whatever, those are going to be food for the bacteria, so they're going to multiply rapidly. And once that tea is finished, you should apply it to, like I said, either a foliar spray for your plants, or you can actually add it to the soil itself to boost the bacteria content of the soil. Use it within 6 hours because the bacteria starts to die off because they ate up all the food and there's nothing left. So yeah, that's compost tea. So I'll interrupt, I'll pause here, to see if we have any questions. What do we got, Justin?
Let's see. So there was an outstanding question here. Are you aware of any apps that are good that identify plant diseases? Have you ever seen an app like that? I've seen the ones that identify plants, but have you seen one that identified diseases?
I have not. I have not seen one. So the best way to do it, the way that I do it, is I do a Google search, or internet search, I'll specify the plant, I'll say disease, and then I add site::edu. I'm just putting it in the chat. Site::edu to the end of the search. And that tells the search engine to only return sites that end in .eu. Sorry, .edu. And the reason I do that is because that gives me all of the university research around the country. And there's so much university research into agriculture, that it's readily available. So if you've got a tomato plant with disease, search tomato diseases, site::edu. And, there'll be a number of universities that provide a description of all the diseases, categories, whatnot. They often include pictures, so you can kind of just look at it and figure it out on your own. So that's the best I've got for using technology.
And PAR recommended also calling UNH Extension, which is also a great resource, especially if you're stumped and it's not one that you're sure about. And then it looks like Donna mentioned Picture This, which is an app that she thought maybe had something to identify diseases as well.
Oh, right on. Oh, cool.
So that'll be one to that'll be one. Check out.
All right, paid subscription. Yeah, well, I will let you know a little secret that the UNH Cooperative Extension, I worked that phone line for a little while, and I would Google site::edu to find answers. So, because that's essentially what cooperative extension is. It's an extension of the university extending out to farmers and people in agriculture and trying to provide science-based research. So they do have manuals and things in the office to look up things, but there's a lot of searching other university websites for information.
Great. And there was one last question. Susan wanted to know, were disinfecting wipes, are those okay to use when you're cleaning your tools, or do you recommend just alcohol?
I would recommend just alcohol. I mean, I don't know what's in the cleaning wipes. I mean, I typically have I just take a spray bottle of alcohol out there and I'll spray my loppers or nippers and wipe them off in between cuts. So I think alcohol probably works best, because I don't know what else is in the sanitizing.
Yeah, you probably don't want to inject that into the.
I just don't know, because you're going to be cutting a plant, and it's probably fine. But I always use alcohol. Some people like to use the bleach solution. I try to avoid using too much bleach.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
I think that covers our bases.
All right. Very good. So oops, excuse me. My notes. All right. So this is probably why everybody showed up here. Good bugs, bad bugs. So we're going to talk about bad bugs first, and we're going to do it in context of what plants they affect. And so we're going to kind of start with that, and then move on to the bad bugs. To the good bugs. So starting with our greens, so our lettuces, our kale, our Swiss chard, these are some of the common bad bugs. Aphids, which are pictured in the upper right, attacking a kale plant. They come in multiple colors. They're black aphids, white aphids, green aphids. These look like gray or blue aphids, but they come in all sorts of colors. When you get an infestation, you know it. They show up, as in this picture, in force, and they can quickly overwhelm a plant. So again, using the methodology here, first thing you're going to do, you can't really hand pick all of these guys off, so you're going to have to cut off the affected leaves, and perhaps then search the plant, look for any kind of eggs, and then maybe give it a spray with an organic, the organic pesticide with the garlic, hot peppers, onions, things like that, to kind of keep them from re-landing back on that spot. Leaf miners, they often hit lettuce and Swiss chard. I don't think I've ever seen them in kale, but these are little insects that actually the three pictures on the bottom are all leaf miner photos. And so on the left, you see the egg cluster on the back underside of the leaves. Most insects lay their eggs on the underside of leaves because it gives them protection from rain and sun. And then those eggs hatch, and the little, I don't know what they are, if they're probably larvae, they actually get inside the plant, and in between the top and the bottom leaf, they just start eating inside. So the leaf remains whole, but it's empty. As the picture on the right, you'll see these trails of these leaf miners that are eating the leaf from the inside out. So again, remove affected leaves, give it a spray. Spider mites, they do I have a picture? I don't have a picture of the spider mite. So they attack leaves also, but they don't eat the leaves. I believe that they kind of suck the chlorophyll and other phytochemicals out of the leaves. So if your leaves have lots of white patches and things like that, I think I have a picture of a spider mite later on, but it's probably, could be spider mites or some other sucking insect that is sucking out those chemicals. And then cabbage looper, which affects kale, its caterpillar stage is the one that does the damage to it, and it just eats a lot. They can eat a lot, so in no time your kale can disappear. So that's why the regular visits to a garden are important. You want to catch them early before they take hold and ruin a plant. So moving on, tomatoes, there are really two primary pests for tomatoes up here. I had mentioned the nematode that attacks tomato plants. That's most common down south. Don't really see that up this way because the winters tend to kill those. They don't overwinter well here. But we do see lots of tomato hornworm. That is the green caterpillar over on the right. So you can see in the top picture, there is the caterpillar stage, and then there's the adult moth. That's what it looks like. So if you see that flying around, you know what that's going to try to produce. So, but the tomato hornworm is so well camouflaged, you can inspect your plants and you can look right over them. They're really, really hard to see. But again, picking them off is probably the best defense. Is to, you see a tomato with a good sized chunk out of it, that you got hornworms. Really inspect that plant well. And again, just to let you know, if you see the hornworm on the lower right with those white eggs coming out of their back, you want to leave that alone because that's going to produce a lot of the beneficial predatory wasps. So then we have a flea beetle, which is a small beetle that attacks the leaves of the tomato. You can see there, it kind of digs right in and damages the leaves. So that's going to be, again, the cut off infected leaves, spray it down with the organic insecticide. So peppers, we've got kind of three main pests up here. The pepper weevil, which is in the upper right there. It's kind of a little round beetle. It actually attacks the fruit itself and digs into the pepper, whereas the cucumber beetle is a leaf feeder, and so you're going to see that. And then you have cutworms, which is in the lower left. Cutworms are usually going to affect a pepper plant right after transplant. You're going to come into your garden and you're going to see it looks like somebody chopped your pepper plant down with an axe. And that's the cutworm. It just chews the base of the plant, knocks it over, and then moves on to the next one. I don't know why it doesn't eat the whole thing instead of ruining all the peppers, but that's what it does. So you want to keep an eye out for that. If you see any of those, you got to remove them. So one thing you can do to protect those, thinking about the physical barrier, if you've had problems with those in the past, when you plant your peppers, put a little tube, sometimes I don't know if I have one, like a toilet paper tube. You can slice that and put that around your seedling, and maybe a little aluminum foil around it, and that will prevent that. That'll create a barrier that prevents the cutworm from accessing the pepper stalk. Okay, squash. So our main pest with squash is the squash borer, and it is most harmful again in the caterpillar stage. The picture in the upper right is a picture of their eggs. So if you have squash plants, when you're out there observing your garden, flip over your squash leaves. See if you see any of these little orange eggs. They're usually bunched tight together. You want to, you see them, you want to get rid of that. You cut off the whole leaf or just the section with the eggs on it, but you want to get that out of there because that's going to hatch into the caterpillar, which you see in the lower right. That bores inside the stalk of the squash and again eats it from the inside out and can really devastate and destroy any type of squash plant, cucumbers included. So there are ways to, if you find one early, you can remove it and hopefully save the plant. But again, that's why the regular visits to the garden are so important to get a jump on these. And the picture on the left, it's a really beautiful looking insect, but that's the squash borer in the adult stage. So if you see that flying around, then take a swat at it. That's all I can tell you. So the other thing I guess would be, as we saw with the barrier, the crop cover for the kale or cabbage earlier to keep that moth out. You can cover your squash to keep that out. However, one problem is that the bees and the pollinators won't be able to get in there, so not always a good option with your squash, unless you hand pollinate, but that's a whole nother subject. All right, cucumber, it's a type of squash, so it has the squash borer. Spider mite, there's a picture of that in the bottom in the middle, that's a spider mite. They're really tiny, but the leaf to the left of the spider mite, that shows the damage of the spider mite, how it kind of sucks out the chlorophyll and the phytochemicals from the leaf, making it pale white, even poke some holes in it because it dies off and decays, so it can create those holes. But the cucumber beetle is a pest that we have to look out for. There's a couple of pictures. They come in a couple of different varieties, so keep an eye out for those. The caterpillar on the left is in its larva stage. And then cucumbers have a unique pest called a pickle worm, and this affects the fruit itself. It will bore a small hole in the side of the cucumber, and again, eating it from the inside out. It'll just hang out there and eat till its heart's content until it pupates into its adult. Excuse me. So, so again, the regular visits, you see a couple of holes in there. You might, in your cucumbers, identify, that pest. Difficult one to get rid of. I'm not sure because you can't really spray the insecticide because it's on the inside.
Is there a symptom to know if you have them in there?
That's what I'm just trying to think right now. I can't think of it other than inspecting your cucumbers, and if you see a hole in the side of your cucumbber.
Oh, because they come in. They come in.
So they'll bore a tiny, it's like a little drill right into the side of your cucumber. So you have to kind of check that out. So again, regular visits, observe and interact, because yeah. So some of our beans get affected by a bean beetle. There are a lot of beetles that eat leaves. So, not all beetles are bad though, because the ladybug is a beetle, but, there are basically two classes: beetles that eat leaves or beetles that eat bugs. So the good ones are the ones that eat the bugs, and the bad ones are the ones that eat the leaves. So, so the picture of the bean beetle there shows it both in its larva stage and larvae stage, excuse me, and the adult beetle stage. I mentioned cutworms before. This is a cutworm in the lower left, and it shows, the damage that it can do. It just, like I said, chops down your plants. And the picture below the bean beetle, that's some damage that bean beetles had caused. So again, if you find them early, you get them out of there, then you can save your plants and your harvest. So these are some other bad bugs, and these are kind of general bad bugs. They don't have a favorite plant. They're going to eat, lots of different plants. So grasshoppers, I don't see too many of them around in my garden. I see one or two. I have a lot of crickets. Crickets eat insects, so they're probably beneficial. But the grasshoppers eat leaves, and if there is a large swarm of grasshoppers, they can really devastate a crop. So you want to keep an eye on them and try to dispose of them. As I mentioned, variety of beetles. Beetles, they're good and bad. The bad ones eat the leaves, so you got to keep an eye out for eggs on leaves and in the beetles themselves. Weevils, I think they're very much beetle-like, but I think the difference between a weevil and a beetle, and this is my understanding, is that the weevils tend to go for the fruit itself, right? So your corn weevil, they're going to eat the corn itself. They're not going to worry too much about the leaves. And the pepper weevil and things like that, they eat the fruit. Earwigs. So I've always wondered, are earwigs good or bad? And turns out they're classified as bad. I've never had a lot of damage from earwigs, even though I found them. I used to find them when I grew corn. But they tend to eat flowers and leaves, but they don't eat as much as some of the other predators. So that's probably why I never consider them bad, but they are classified as bad. One beetle that I will mention, Japanese beetle, probably the most notorious bad bug or bad beetle. And I don't have a picture of that, but it's pretty distinctive, copper wings and shell and kind of green eyes. And they can multiply quickly and they can devastate a crop. So barriers and hand removal is the best approach for staying on top of the Japanese beetles. All right, so I'm going to take a little pause here after talking about the bad bugs. If anybody has questions or something, yeah, let's see.
We've got a pro tip from Melissa here.
I just saw that.
Yeah, we got it says the hormones. Okay, so you could trim the damaged foliage after you remove the worm. That way you don't waste time rechecking old damage. Perfect.
That's a good idea. Yep, great idea.
Yeah, and the manual removal, the other thing to think about too is that I've found with squash borers in particular is that their eggs are pretty sticky. So when they're on the underside of the leaf, sometimes I will just cut the section out with a pair of scissors. I don't take off the whole leaf. I just cut out the section where the eggs are stuck to it. So if that's another way to kind of keep your plant maintained if the leaf is still fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
We actually, a funny story where my son and I decided to put that leaf that we had cut off inside of his hatching kit for butterflies, and we let them hatch. But we had a very small hole in the kit that was, and they all got out. And it looked like 10 eggs, but it was a lot more. It was probably 50.
Wow.
So we hatched them intentionally, apparently.
Well, hopefully they didn't get out of the house where they were in the house.
Yeah, they were on the porch, so they were in the house. So I don't know. We don't really know where they all went. They didn't get accounted for.
Well, they probably can't travel that far, from your porch to your garden. That's a long way to go. So, they might have died along the way. I don't know.
Another thing that we had found in a prior year for a camp that we were running, there's actually a couple sites out there where you can purchase ladybugs and lacewings and things of that nature. So that it is possible. You do kind of want a little bit of protection for those, like a habitat, if you will. So if you're going to release them, kind of keep in mind that it'd be nice if you had some environment for them to kind of stick around in, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
You could imagine a barren space with a bunch of wind and not a lot of plant life. They can just kind of whip away.
Right, and what I've heard also, I've never bought ladybugs, but when you release them, it should be in the evening or late in the evening, because if you did it during the day, they're going to fly and find somewhere to live. But if you do it in the evening, it's getting dark, they're going to hunker down and they're probably going to end up staying put more. So they tend to travel farther during the day. So something else I heard. So we get a little tip here from Elizabeth talking about avoiding squash bugs. Some plants to add to your garden: nasturtiums, marigolds, tansy, catnip, dill, oregano, lemon balm, sage, and petunias. So thank you for that tip.
And several of those are also kind of nice to interplant. You know, they don't, if you have if you've got your tomato plants and you want to pop something in the middle of those so that you don't have to weed so much. It's nice to cut down on your weeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember back in a slide a little while ago, one of the early ones when talking about attracting predators, I was talking about camouflaging your plants. I had shown a picture there that had some kale that was surrounded by some chamomile, some dill, some calendula, some marigolds, things like that. So yeah, really interplant all of your herbs and flowers with your vegetables. It's a good thing.
And dill is one of those ones that seems to grow anywhere you put it. So
yes, it does, and it's self-seeding. So dill seeds are wonderful spice. So I recommend saving the seeds unless you want a whole lot of dill coming up next year. Yeah. All right. Cool. So we got on 8 o'clock here. So we got one more section here, and this is to talk about good bugs. So I didn't see any other questions. Did you see any other adjustments?
Yeah, no, I think you're good to go.
All right, cool. So as I mentioned, the ladybug, she's our favorite good bug, or at least the most well-known. So these are 4 different pictures showing the different stages of the ladybug. Upper left, we see the adult beetle with the egg cluster. Looks similar to the squash borer eggs, except these are a little more yellow, but I noticed they're all clustered and they're going to be on the underside of leaves. Most of the time when I've seen ladybug eggs and larvae has been on trees, not on plants like annuals in the garden. So kind of keep an eye out there. So if you want to know the difference between, like, if it's a squash borer or if it's a beetle, if it's on a squash plant, most likely it's a squash borer, because I think they exclusively lay their eggs on plants that they prefer, any kind of squash. Ladybugs, most of the times I find them on trees around my yard. So in the upper right, we have the larvae stage, and that is the stage where it eats a lot of aphids. So then it goes into the its little cocoon there in the lower left. It's inactive. It doesn't eat in that. It's just in its transformation. Then it comes out as the adult beetle, and at that stage, it also eats aphids. And I think that a lady bug can eat about 50,000 aphids in its lifetime or something like that. That's a lot of aphids, which is good because aphids, as I said, they show up in bunches. So ladybugs are a wonderful pest for wonderful biological partner for that. So we talked about the lacewing, and this is kind of the green lacewing, and this shows a couple different stages of that. So at its larval stage, it eats aphids. It also does in its adult stage, but eats some other bugs, the mealybugs, thrips, white flies, and things like that. So so I found this really interesting. If you look at the picture in the upper right, those are the eggs of the lacewing, and they put each egg up on a little stem, and I don't know how it creates that, but it does that to protect its eggs from predators, because there are insects that will crawl along the leaf and eat insect eggs. So by doing that, that's a self-defense mechanism. So in the lower left, that's the larvae stage of the lacewing, and then finally the adult lacewing. So if you see that, that's a good bug. So wasps, hornets, yellow jackets, these are all beneficial. We don't really think about bees. We think about them as pollinators, but we don't really think about them as predators. But these all in their larvae stage, they'll eat insects, and in their adult stage, they'll actually eat some caterpillars. So the picture in the lower right is a paper wasp, that is eating a caterpillar. So sometimes, you'll see yellow jackets on meat. They're called meat bees. You see them in trash. They're, humming around there. So they, they'll eat insects and caterpillars and things like that. So, we never really think about it. So I forget the phrase that I read, but something about an unwelcomed guest, but it's beneficial nonetheless, because nobody wants to get stung by a wasp or a hornet or a yellow jacket. You don't want the nests in your garden, but they do good things by consuming some bad bugs. So another good bug is a praying mantis. Don't see these too much anymore, but at least not in the city. But they'll eat caterpillars and insects. So just had some pictures here to show you the different stages of that. The picture on the right, top right, is kind of the nest of where the praying mantis lays its eggs. So that's just going to be like this little, I don't want to call it a cocoon because it's not, but it's like a little nest where it lays all of its eggs. And then in the lower right is the little nymph that comes out, and there's hundreds of them that come out, and some of them make it to the adult stage and others fall prey to something else. But that's kind of what they look like in their different stages. But a very beneficial one if you see it. So dragonflies are good bugs. They eat. In their nymph stage, they eat aquatic larvae, so they eat a lot of mosquito larvae. So they're very good to have around. But dragonflies typically lay their eggs near water. You see the picture of it sitting on the lily pad. So you're not going to necessarily find habitat in any of our gardens for dragonflies, but they do travel quite a distance. I have them all over my yard. No water in sight, but they're very beneficial to have as well. So some general predators, spiders and centipedes or millipedes, these are things that are going to eat all sorts of insects, larvae. They'll even eat snails and slugs. So there are things, you see spider webs in your garden, that might be a good thing, because they might help keep down the aphids or the mites, or anything that might get caught in their web. So and the centipedes and the caterpillars can take care of some of the centipedes and millipedes can take care of some of the larger pests like the snails and the slugs. I think that's about it. Any questions on good bugs? There are a lot of good bugs and bad bugs. So before we get to the questions, so Justin had provided me with this field guide of good bugs and bad bugs. It's from Mac's Field Guide, and I was able to find some images of this, some decent resolution images of this on the internet, and I put them in the resource folder for you all to have. So there are too many here to go through one by one, but I thought it would be a good resource for you to have. And it talks on that guide, it talks about first of all, good bug or bad bug, but it talks about its habitat, where it lives and what it feeds on, so you can kind of get a sense for their habits. So if you have a pest that you're looking to control, you might say, well, who do I want to attract? You might be able to refer to this and see who might eat the pest that you're looking for. So I don't know, any questions on good bugs? What we got in the chat?
Yeah, it looked like we had Elizabeth had a question about whether the female or male pests, is there a difference between the two? Do they look the same, or they target different stuff? Do you know?
Well, I do not know that. That's a great question. I do not know.
Yeah, it's helpful. It was helpful to see some of the pictures, like even of the dragonfly as a larvae, where it's crawling around eating bugs. Like I feel like I've seen that before, but I would never have thought that was a dragonfly.
Right, and the ladybug. I mean, this one in the upper right, it kind of looks like a ladybug, but the first time I saw it, I'm like, what the heck is that thing?
Yeah, and there are often a lot of them together, and you're like, oh no, what is this bug? This is a problem. It happened to us at Dr. Chris.
Dr. Chris school. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then they get into this little cocoon, and then they abandon that, so you're going to find this hollow shell. And you're like, what is that? And so that's just going to be a whole bunch of ladybugs hatched. So
yeah, it's an interesting thing that you have to kind of keep track of 3 forms of these pests.
Yes. Yeah.
That's good. The resource folder we'll send out after. I just wanted to make sure I sent this out in an email today that we're going to start sending our emails out through MailChimp. So I'm just going to put a link there so you can add your info into MailChimp so that we can send emails through there rather than through my personal business email. So I just put that link there. I don't know if we have, I think those were the last questions. I did want to, we can post more questions if you think of stuff, but yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I just wanted to touch on this before you talked about what you were going to talk about. But so these are some of the resources that I used, cooperative extensions for soil testing, just general gardening knowledge. This is probably not very readable in this, but this is the resource file that I used to put this presentation together. So there is a PDF of this in the resource folder, so you can just click on these links. So the topic is listed on the left. The link is in the middle, and I just referenced the source on the right, so you knew which university I found this at. Yeah, I forget what it's called, but there's a .pdf file up there with resources for it. There's the two images, one image for the front and the back. I've also put up PDF files with the organic pesticide and organic fungicide recipes, and the slides from the presentation are also in that resource folder.
Wow, thanks, Dave.
So, yeah,
very helpful.
So I don't know if.
And just one other question that came through while you were chatting there. How do we get the good bugs into our garden? I know that you mentioned, planting certain things that attract them would be the first part of that answer.
That's the first and the last part of the answer. So
okay.
You need to give them food and habitat. You have to invite them to your gardens. So again, there are. I think that you can't go wrong by planting a variety of flowers and herbs in your garden. They're going to attract pollinators and other beneficials. So if you're looking for to invite a specific good bug to the garden, then you need to research to see what their habitat is in order to invite them. But it is basically providing them with food and a place to live, and they will come.
And I think there's in regards to purchasing bugs, there are places that sell bugs, and there are places that even sell like the praying mantis sacks. Oh, well, you can actually get a sack, and I don't know if that's like a local farmers exchange that might have access to that, or could at least point you to the right place for that. But I know that we bought some for a camp that we did with students, and the praying mantis were pretty neat to see hatch. The kids really got a kick out of that because they come out of the sack they just keep coming and coming and coming. 100 of them probably came out, and then they all stand there looking around like, now what? Yeah, now what? And then I think they might have, if I'm remembering correctly, I think after a couple of days we left them there too long and they started killing each other.
Right, they needed something to eat.
Right, they started attacking. So it was an interesting thing. But before we go, I did want to mention the Little Free Farm Stand. So as you are growing abundantly this season, and you do have some extras, keep in mind that is an option. So what we do is we gather food from different places, different people in the city. Some people will do like food drives. You can maybe even set one up at your faith organization or your office. Or you can grow the food yourself. You can shop for it this year. We actually made it a lot easier to give the food rather than just have it available to drop off when the Little Free Farm Stand was open. We actually have 10 sites throughout the city this year where you can drop off fresh veggies every day of the week, and they'll get picked up every day of the week. So there's a link in here where you can sign up for that. As well as a form in the resource folder. And then the last just general request would be if there is anyone out there that knows someone that is selling a pickup truck, we are looking to purchase a pickup truck that we can use to become a little free veggie truck this year that we can drive around and deliver into some of the spaces where we can't set up a physical stand. We can reach some of the outskirts of town, and we can run that pickup route 7 days a week throughout the city, so that we can gather as much produce as possible, and at the same time, support your local farmers by purchasing their produce and putting it there. It's a great opportunity to, even if you have some extra stuff from your CSA that you want to plan to dedicate to giving, that's an easy way to do it. And there's probably going to be a drop spot that is close to where you live in Nashua. So I think that covers the two highlights that I wanted to share, and there's our contact info.
Yeah, and as I said, the slides are going to be are in the resource folder already, so this information is there. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop an email.
And one of the questions just popped in here, and 2 questions. Are we going to get the resources link today? No, I'll try to send that tomorrow, but not today. And then 2 is, where are the farm stands located? And those will be posted soon. But if you sign up for the program, then you'll be kind of looped in the information. You have to be signed up for it to actually, for you to be getting kind of up-to-date information, because it's a growing program. It's kind of new, and we're learning as we go, and we're adapting as we learn what works and what doesn't. So it's important to stay connected so that you're not just floating out there with old info. And with that, we shall sign off, I think.
Yep, I think so. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a pleasure, and hope you learned something. So
yeah, thanks so much, Dave, for putting this all together. This was very
Thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
All right. Have a good night, folks. We'll see you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Same to you.
I stop my share. Oh, there it is. Stop share. All right. I think you're still recording there, Justin.
Oh, yeah. Let me stop that.